Good morrow, friends. I'm Jordan, and this is Not Strictly History. Hello and good day, friends. It's great to see all of you. Great to be back. And by that I mean it's been a while since I recorded, which obviously you don't know. That's the one problem with recording episodes ahead of time. But that also means that you're getting your episodes on time. So you're welcome. I hope you're all doing great. I hope you're having a fantastic day. If you're not, I sympathize, empathize. Sometimes days are bad. We've all been there. Today, we are going to talk about somebody who a lot of you probably have heard of, but probably don't know that much about because that was me before I did the research for this episode. Today, we're going to be talking about the one and only Mary Shelley. Some of you, if you have heard of her, probably know her as either the wife of Percy Shelley, the great romantic poet, or, most importantly, in my opinion, she is the author of Frankenstein. So yes, today we are talking about Mary Shelley. Okay, so let me see. I feel like I say this in every episode, so maybe this is just going to be a running theme for the rest of forever. Mary Shelley's life, can't stop, won't stop. And I don't even mean that as in Mary Shelley can't stop, won't stop. I mean that her life can't stop, won't stop. This could honestly be its very own podcast, of 20 episodes just devoted to Mary Shelley's life and the craziness that happened, the intricacies thereof. I mean, let's be honest, okay? If you're talking about anybody, everybody's life is complicated. A lot happens. Summary is going to be your friend. But holy moly, so much happened in her life. My outline is pretty long. We're going to try not to be here for forever because there's so much about her life that's actually really, really fascinating. And I don't want to bore you. I want us all to go on this journey together, learn more about Mary Shelley, and be inspired because she was a pretty neat lady. So, what we're going to do is summarize, just like always, okay? So, Mary Shelley was born Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. That's a lie. Shelley's her married name. Let me start over. Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin was born August 30th, 1797. And she passed away February 1st, 1851. Her parents were Mary Wollstonecraft and William Godwin. Her father was a political philosopher. But let's talk about her mom. Mary Shelley's mother was the one and only Mary Wollstonecraft. She was an early feminist who wrote A Vindication of the Rights of Woman. I am throwing my outline on the ground and putting my hands in the air. That's what's happening right now. Because Mary Wollstonecraft was so freaking cool. I learned about her many, many moons ago, and I just love her. She's actually so inspiring. She is a woman who wrote a treatise on the rights of women in the 1700s. Can I get amens, claps, and snaps for Mary Wollstonecraft? Thank you. Thank you. I absolutely love her. She's just iconic. She's so inspiring, and go Mary Wollstonecraft. So she was so obviously brave, very smart, very loving. Before she met William Godwin, she had a relationship with a man named Gilbert Imlay, with whom she had a daughter named Fanny. And after she had Fanny, she wrote about Fanny, and she wrote about being a mom. And she wrote about how her love for her daughter felt like so much more than just the love that a mother feels for her child. She wrote about how much she just truly adored her and how bright she wanted her future to be and how much she hoped for her. And it's interesting now because in our modern day, we just think, yes, that's called being a mother. But it's interesting because when she wrote this, she said, it's more than just being her mother. I want what's absolutely best for her, and I want her to be happy and adored and wonderful. And so it's like that's an interesting little take on motherhood. That's probably a discussion for another time, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. So that's what Mary Wollstonecraft wrote about her daughter Fanny. Eventually, she fell in love with William Godwin in England. In Godwin in England. Oh my goodness, Godwin in England. She got pregnant, and they were married. And then Mary gave birth to Mary on August 30th, 1797. Now, this is where the story starts to get tragic already, okay? During the birth of Mary Shelley, her mother Mary, her placenta broke apart during birth and it became infected. And she died 11 days later of what was then called childbed fever. Really, she had sepsis, blood poisoning. The placenta was stuck inside her and got infected, and she died 11 days later, which is, I mean, it's tragic in so many ways. And I can't imagine the amount of pain she must have been in. And it's just, anytime a woman dies in childbirth, it makes me really sad. But after she passed away, William wrote, I firmly believe there does not exist her equal in the world. I know from experience we were formed to make each other happy. I have not the least expectation that I can now ever know happiness again. And how refreshing to have him love his wife so much. I just need to take a moment and apologize really quick. Um, my dog, Duncan, is in the room with me, as he most often is, and he decided to shake and roll around on the floor. So you probably can hear that, and I'm really sorry. He loves you all. He's very friendly, so I'm sure he'd be happy to have new friends. I'm sorry if that was distracting. So let's continue. So, 1 year after Mary died, her husband William published a memoir about her, and overall, it was meant to be this sincere, compassionate, loving tribute, and it was really lovely. But talking about her affairs and her illegitimate child made it really quite shocking, and so a lot of people were a little bit scandalized by it. But Fanny and Mary read this and they read their mother's works and they were brought up to cherish her memory, which is how it should be. So thank you. So obviously, when she died, Mary was an infant and Fanny was 3 years old. William unofficially adopted Fanny, so it was never technically legal. But after this, she went by Godwin. William was often in debt and he couldn't raise his children alone. So when Mary was 4 and Fanny was 7, he remarried their neighbor, whose name was Mary Jane Clairmont, and they married in December of 1801. So Mary Jane is the stepmother. That's how we'll refer to her, not as stepmother. We'll call her Mary Jane. So she had 2 children of her own, Charles and Claire. And William's friends did not like her. They said that she was very quick tempered, very quarrelsome. And Mary actually did not like her either. She said that she favored her own children far above them, and they never really got along. But by all accounts, William was very devoted to Mary Jane, and it was a quote unquote successful marriage in that way. So, William and Mary Jane started a publishing firm, which was called M.J. Godwin. They sold children's books, stationery, maps, and games. Unfortunately, this enterprise wasn't super successful. It never really kept a profit. They had to keep borrowing to keep it afloat, which absolutely breaks my heart because a place that sells children's books, stationery, maps, and games is right up my alley. I would be there every single day. Nevertheless, it didn't do super well financially. William was only saved from debtor's prison by his philosophical devotee named Francis Place. It was a wealthy man who just was super into William and all of his philosophy and stuff, so he loaned them more money. We're not going to talk a ton about Mary's parents, as in William and Mary Jane. There's definitely a lot there, but there's so much here that we have to summarize somewhere, right? So we'll talk about them and how, it was just an example of how Mary's life was lived. They were in constant debt. Her dad was a philosopher. Again, he was kind of the opinion that it should be, that his life should be kind of more like artists during the Renaissance, how they would just be hired by people and they would have patrons and get paid to be creative and cool. That's what he wanted out of life, which we all want that, sir. So you're not really that special. Nevertheless, that's what we're going to say about her parents. So let's talk about Mary and Fanny's education. So, interestingly enough, she and Fanny got a really great education for girls of their time. Um, they were taught a wide range of subjects. They had full access to their father's library. And since he was a philosopher, he had a really neat library. And again, because he's a philosopher, he has hordes of intellectual friends that just come to talk about educational things. And Mary and Fanny were encouraged to sit in on these discussions and learn as much as they could. They had a governess and daily tutors. They read books on Roman and Greek history all the time. So even though they never went to school, they had a really good education. So when Mary was 15, William wrote about her that she was, quote, singularly bold, somewhat imperious, and active of mind. Her desire of knowledge is great, and her perseverance in everything she undertakes almost invincible. Which I love, okay? There's a lot about William I don't approve of, and maybe we'll get to that. It doesn't really matter. But what I really, really love about him is how much he loved his wife, how much he loved his daughters. And especially at this time, what guy is going out of his way to make sure his daughters have such a wonderful education? And he's so proud of her and how much she wants to learn and how much her perseverance takes her places. And I think that that is so incredible. Snaps for William, okay? So again, Mary is 15 at this time. And at this time, William sent her to stay with the family of a radical named William Baxter in Scotland. Shout out to Scotland, my ancestral homeland. So her dad knew this man, William Baxter, and he wrote to him about Mary, quote, I am anxious that she should be brought up like a philosopher, even a cynic, which is so intriguing. So scholars have questioned this. They've thought, okay, she was sent to stay with this family for a while. Why? Was she sent for her health? Was she sent so that she was kind of away from the shady business of, the debt and everything? Or was she sent to introduce her to more radical politics? We don't super know, but I think we can kind of guess from her dad's letter that he just wanted her to be exposed to a different kind of lifestyle. So there you go. But she absolutely loved it there. Who wouldn't? It's Scotland. She loved the landscape. William Baxter had 4 daughters that she got along with really, really well. And she just loved being there. So she actually went back the next year for another stay of 10 months. And her time in Scotland both times, was really, really influential in her life. So actually, in the original introduction to Frankenstein, she talks about her time in Scotland. And she wrote in the introduction, quote, I wrote then, but in a most commonplace style. It was beneath excuse me, we're going to start over. Quote, I wrote then, but in a most commonplace style. It was beneath the trees of the grounds belonging to our house, or on the bleak sides of the woodless mountains near, that my true compositions, the airy flights of my imagination, were born and fostered. I find that so incredibly beautiful that it almost makes me want to cry, that she can look back on this time in her life and find that this is when her imagination, when her creativity really blossomed. She was given the freedom to be able to explore the things that her mind could do. And just kudos to everybody who gave her this opportunity, because it shapes her for the rest of her life, as we are about to see. Now we're going to talk about Percy. Hello, Percy Shelley. So, he came from an aristocratic family, and when he met Mary Shelley, Mary Godwin, he was actually already married. So, thumbs down, sir. He was married to a woman named Harriet. So, he met Mary because he was a follower of her father's. He was very, very interested in and believed in William Godwin's political and philosophical ideas. But his family did not approve of his radical ways. So they were afraid that if he was given all of his inheritance, he would give all of the money to the poor and just waste away his inheritance on things that they believed didn't matter. So until he was officially of age to inherit, he had a hard time getting a hold of money. They were pretty stingy with his allowance, which I'm actually not going to comment on. So, Percy and Mary probably met each other between her two Scotland stays. Her second stay in Scotland, she got home on March 30th, 1814. At this point, Percy was estranged from his wife Harriet, and he was regularly visiting Godwin. William, again, I mentioned this briefly, he wanted help with money. He kind of felt like, hey, I'm the creative, intellectual one. I should have patrons that give me money in order to survive. And so Percy, again, comes from a very wealthy family. And he actually told William, like, yes, I'd love to give you money. I'd love to be a patron, quote unquote. But then he had to say no, pardon me, because again, his family was like, hey, we're not just gonna like give you money because you'll give it away. So Percy had to say, listen, I'd love to help you, but I actually can't. So this made William pretty angry and left him feeling really betrayed. So at this time, Percy and Mary were having secret meetings. I'm raising my eyebrows a lot of times. So they were having secret meetings at her mother's grave at St. Pancras Old Church. So listen, I'm trying not to laugh hysterically, and I'm not laughing because I think it's funny. I'm laughing because this is the most iconic thing ever. They were meeting secretly at her mother's grave, which is the most morbid, dark, gothic, incredibly awesome thing I've ever heard in my life. So they fell in love, and at this point, she was 16 and he was 21, which is illegal, sir. Anyway, so June 26, 1814 comes around. This is the day that they declared their love for one another. And listen, I don't know if listen, I'm just going to tell you, I have no idea if these secret meetings were during the day, if these secret meetings were at night. Since they're meeting in a graveyard, I have just always assumed that they were meeting each other secretly at night in a graveyard. That makes it so much cooler in my head. But again, I don't know. So on this day, they declared their love. Percy confessed that he couldn't hide his, quote, ardent passion, which led her to a, quote, sublime and rapturous moment in which she confessed that she also loved him. So it was either on this day or the next day that they consummated their love. Let me just say it, guys. Percy took Mary's virginity in the graveyard, and allegedly it was on her mother's grave. I don't know whether to say that this is incredibly messed up or it's incredibly iconic. It could actually be both. That's all I'm going to say, but please comment on this. I want to talk about this so badly. That's actually one of the only things that I knew about Mary Shelley before diving into her life, because one of my very, very good friends, Quinn, loves Mary Shelley and told me, dude, yeah, she totally lost her virginity on her mother's grave. And I was like, shut up. That's the most incredible thing I've ever heard. Again, that's an urban legend. I don't know how true it is. But anyway, so when William, her father, found out that they were in love and wanted to be married, he actually was really angry and he didn't approve. He tried to thwart their relationship. And this actually really, really confused Mary because she loved her dad. They had a great relationship. And she knew that Percy was one of her father's best students, for lack of a better term. And in her mind, Percy was kind of the epitome of all of her father's beliefs and ideas. And so it was really hard on her that he didn't approve. And again, it left her feeling pretty confused. So we're going to jump ahead to July of 1814. This is just a month later from the virginity graveyard story. So on July 28th, 1814, Mary and Percy run away to France, which is basically an elopement. And you're saying to me, Jordan, he's already married. That's not an elopement. I agree, okay? I would gladly sign my name to this. However, because they were a couple running away to a different country together, it was, for all intents and purposes, an elopement, okay? But let's talk about this for a second. So Mary and Percy elope to France. Um, her stepsister Claire came with them. So I have so many questions. I have so many thoughts. Listen, in my experience, I've never eloped, but it is my understanding that when you elope, you go alone. It's just the couple. I don't think you're normally taking somebody with you. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. That, whatever. So they elope, and Claire just decides to come along. So their stepmother, Mary Jane, Claire's mother, actually followed them to France and was like, hey, this is ridiculous. Maybe you should come home. And they actually convinced her, no, this is legit. We're not coming home. So she let them continue on, and she went back to England. So the three of them started to travel through France towards Switzerland. And Mary kind of wrote later about how this was a very romantic time. Romantic in the sense that it was as if they were in a novel. There had actually just been a war in France, War of 1812. We'll cover that another time. So France is actually kind of falling apart this time. It's not a great place to be. There was a lot of desolation happening, but for them it was just so intriguing and lovely. And I mean, they're traveling through a war zone. I mean, who else wants to spend their who wouldn't want to spend their honeymoon in a war zone? Thank you. So as they're traveling, Percy and Mary read her mother's works together. They kept a joint journal, and they both continued their own writing. And this is a pattern that they established again right after their quote unquote elopement. And they kept doing this throughout their entire life. They would share a journal, but they would also write in their own journals. This pattern of continually expanding their minds and reading and writing is something that they did forever. So eventually they ran out of money, and they had to go back to England on September 13th, 1814. So on/during this trip, that's the same thing. Oh my gosh, this outline is ridiculous. Okay, so it's either I know what I meant to say was it was either right before this trip or on this trip that Mary became pregnant. And so when they get back to England, she's pregnant. They were penniless. William would not interact with them, and that hurt Mary very deeply because again, she loved her father and they were very close. So Mary and Percy, and again Claire, they all moved to some nearby lodgings. They began this life that they had started in France. They spent their time reading, writing, and entertaining friends and other writers and intellectuals. So they were again in debt a lot because Percy's family was again not giving him a ton of money. And so he was often gone. He would leave to dodge creditors. And the letters that they wrote to each other at this time reveal how hard it was for them to be separated. Okay, so let me see. Yes, this is what I'm going to talk about it. Okay, so Mary and Percy clearly loved each other very, very much. But we're going to jump ahead. And by that I mean let's talk about the 60s. Let's talk about the free love concept, okay? Percy Shelley was very much into free love for everybody, okay? And Mary agreed to this. I feel like agreed should be in some kind of it's a loose agreement, okay? She understood the concept of it, but she only ever loved Percy. She had a lot of attachments, a lot of different friendships. She had a lot of really deep emotional connections with other men, but she never physically cheated on Percy because she only ever loved him. Percy was not the same. He was okay with having other lovers, which you suck, Percy. So actually, let's talk about this. So at this time, they're in their other lodgings. Mary is pregnant. She was often ill because she was pregnant. So Percy was either gone dodging creditors, or he often went out a lot. With who? Who did he go out with, do you think? Yeah, Claire. Uh-huh. Yeah. So that sheds new light on why Claire went with them to elope. Like it actually really bothers me. And it just really bothers me. I'm going to take this opportunity right now to say that I think that Percy Shelley is a dick. And if that makes me a bad person, I really don't care. And if you don't like that word, I'm sorry, but Percy Shelley is a dick. Thank you. So, At this time, Percy's wife, Harriet, actually gave birth to a son. Let's talk about that. So, Harriet and Percy were estranged before Percy became involved with Mary. And not they were estranged, they were separated, but she had also gotten pregnant. And so this is when she gives birth to their son, and Percy was very very happy about it because he was excited to be a father and to have a son. But this made Mary jealous, and so did his pretty blatant affair with Claire. They were absolutely lovers, and this made Mary jealous as well. So she was actually pretty isolated at this time. She was home alone a lot, sick because she was pregnant, and her boyfriend, kind of not husband, is just out there being the worst. So, let's talk about a man that is one of Percy's really good friends. His name is Thomas Jefferson Hogg, and he is one of the men that Mary was really close to. They had a really, really good friendship, and he's really important in this part of the story. So, February 22nd, 1815 comes around, and Mary gives birth to their daughter. Now, the really, really sad part about this is that the baby was 2 months premature. So she only lived for about a week and a half. And I understand that this is actually really impressive that she lived that long at 2 months premature, but it's also just horrible because their baby died. And on the 6th of March, she wrote a letter to Hogg. And this is what it said. Quote, "My dearest Hogg, my baby is dead. Will you come see me as soon as you can? I wish to see you. It was perfectly well when I went to bed. I awoke in the night to give it suck. It appeared to be sleeping so quietly that I would not wake it. It was dead then, but we did not find that out till morning. From its appearance, it evidently died of convulsions. Will you come? You are so calm a creature, and Shelley is afraid of a fever from the milk, for I am no longer a mother now." I could actually cry. This is so devastating in so many ways. Let me make a side note. It refers to her little girl here. They often did this at this time. They referred to their infants as an it. I don't understand it. It feels pretty impersonal. However, that's just what they did, okay? I'm sorry. But as you can tell from this letter to Hogg, she's absolutely devastated. And it's so sad to hear the story and asking her friend to please come see them and help. So she fell into depression because of this, as anybody probably would, and it was said that she was haunted by visions of her baby, and just overall she wasn't doing well. Eventually she conceived again. She got pregnant again, which helped a little bit in her recovery, and she eventually started to get better. So at about this time, Percy's grandfather passed away, and this is when he got some of his inheritance. So he had some money now, and this allowed them to get a small cottage at Bishopsgate at the edge of Windsor Great Park. And on January 24th, 1816, Mary gave birth to their son, who they named William after her father, and they called him Wilmouse, which is enough to make me cry again. And this is really great because it's great for a lot of different reasons, but Mary often said later that she looked back at this part of her life and thought of it as one of the happiest times. They had some money, they had this little cottage, and they had their new little boy. And I'm happy that they got to experience this because so much of what happens in their life is just not cool at all. This time has come for us to go to Geneva. Let's go to Geneva, friends. For those of you who have seen the Drunk History episodes about this, I just kept thinking of that the whole time that I was researching and writing this part of the story. I could not stop laughing and I was dying. For those of you who have not seen the Drunk History episodes of this, I will 100% be linking them in the show notes because they are hysterical. So, let's tell the Geneva story. So, again, in January, Mary gave birth to their little boy William, and in May, Mary, Percy, Claire, and their baby decided to go to Geneva for the summer to have a holiday. And it wasn't just any holiday. They were going to go to Geneva to go on holiday with the one and only Lord Byron. Lord George Byron. We need to take a minute to talk about him because he is in pretty much the rest of the story. I would do an episode about him, except for the fact that he is the most insufferable, horrific frat boy butthole in the entire planet. And I don't even care that he wrote some good poetry, because he was the actual worst. He was the actual worst. Did I say that Lord George Byron was the actual worst? He was. He was the actual worst. Anyway, they go to Geneva to spend the summer with Lord Byron. So at this time, Claire is actually pregnant, not with Percy's baby, thank heaven. That would just, I would have to throw my outline across the room. She was pregnant with Byron's baby, which is not a shock because Byron is the worst. They arrive in Geneva, and actually, when they arrive, Mary starts telling everybody that she is Mrs. Shelley, which is probably a discussion for another time as well. So the group spent their time boating, writing, and talking late into the night. It was this intellectual getaway. But Mary actually wrote that it rained a ton. It honestly wasn't the best summer. The rain kept them inside for days at a time, and they would spend this time around Byron's fire reading German ghost stories, which is incredibly significant because they're spending all this time inside, they're by a fire, it's really eerie. They're reading ghost stories from Germany, which are the best. And one day, Byron says to them, OMG, guys, let's all write a ghost story because we're all writers. Like, let's do this. This is a great time. This will be a great time. This is a great idea because everything I do is awesome because I'm really arrogant and don't think that anything I could ever do is wrong. That's absolutely what he said. That's a quote verbatim. So they all decide to write a ghost story. And it was actually really, really hard for Mary. She could not think of one for forever. And this is like the article activity. Wow. This is like the activity they've decided to do, so this is the fun, exciting thing they're all doing together, and she cannot think of a ghost story, and it was weighing pretty heavily on her, to be honest. And it was every single morning she would wake up and they'd say, "Hey, have you thought of your ghost story?" And she'd be like, "LOL, no, kill me." So it was actually really hard on her, and she was afraid she didn't have like anything left in her. But then one night, they're by the fire being creepy, and they start talking about electricity, because electricity is starting its life at this time. And I mean, it's not around, it's in the beginning stages, but people kind of knew what it was and they were talking about it. And they started talking about this again, electricity, and thinking, these electric currents, what if you could put them into a body and reanimate a body? And they start talking about this. And in the middle of the night, Mary Shelley has this quote unquote vision of Frankenstein, of this book that she's about to write. She sees this doctor hunched over, piecing together a body using electrical currents to make it come alive. And the story, this she later wrote down this quote unquote vision she had, which is basically just, again, her imagination. But it's the middle of the night. They're all super creepy. It might be raining outside. She's just laying in bed thinking about how these newfangled electric currents might be able to bring a person back to life. And she starts thinking about this, and it's actually the creepiest story ever. But this is how Frankenstein came about. So again, it was Byron's idea that they all write ghost stories because it was just going to be their fun little summer activity. So Frankenstein was originally a short story, but Percy was actually the one who encouraged her to keep going. And so eventually she extended it into a full novel. And later, Mary wrote that this summer in Switzerland was the moment when, quote, when I first stepped out from childhood into life. And this quote is fascinating for so many different reasons. I mean, she's already given birth to 2 children. She kind of has a husband. I mean, she's been through a lot at this point, but this moment when she has this incredible, creative, professional experience, and she's really able to use her talents in a way that she's always has always used them. But I feel like this is a huge development for her creatively and professionally. And for her to say, this is the moment when I was no longer a child, I feel like that's very, very significant. and I think it's actually quite beautiful. So, since this is the moment when Mary Shelley says she became an adult, we're going to talk about Frankenstein. We need to talk about Frankenstein for a lot of different reasons, but we need to talk about it because it's this incredible work that pretty much everybody knows. And she wrote it when she was very, very young, and it's just so incredible. So, Frankenstein was originally published anonymously in the year 1818. The second edition was published in Paris in 1821, and that edition had her name on it. So, let's we need to talk about Percy again. So there is this controversy surrounding Frankenstein where lots of people think that Percy is actually more the one who wrote it and Mary was kind of like the editor. And I cannot even begin to explain to you how infuriating this is, not only because Percy Shelley was a dick, but because this is Mary's creation. And it's one of the only things she's known for, which we'll talk about later because that's a joke too. But it's just ridiculous. Okay. And there are actually notebooks from Mary Shelley that are available in a library in Oxford. And Percy did edit it and he would make suggestions. And these corrections and stuff are visible in these notebooks. And it basically proves, hey, Percy was really just an editor, and he was actually editing it far less than a modern editor would. So, this whole thing, this whole controversy that Percy's really the main author is ridiculous, and I'm not here for it. And I think it's stupid. And I'm a little bit angry just talking about it because, listen, Percy Shelley has his own work and he did his own things creatively and professionally. And he can get credit for that, okay? But he doesn't get to get credit for his wife's incredible work that she is well known for, deservedly. Thank you. I will now get off my soapbox, but Duncan just shook again. I'm sorry. I'm going to get off this soapbox now, but it's important for you to know that that is a thing. So, Frankenstein was published in 1818 anonymously, and then the second edition, published in 1821, had Mary's name on it. Thank you. We are now to a part of the story that is just almost unbearably tragic. A lot of this story has been tragic so far, I understand, but this part is, again, it's very, very tragic. I would like to issue a trigger warning before I go on. We are going to be talking about suicide. So if that is not something that you feel like you can listen to or want to listen to, I would recommend skipping ahead probably about 10 or so minutes. If you feel like you can listen, that's great. I'm not going to go into huge or gruesome detail, but we are going to talk about it. So let's start. So they returned to England from Geneva in September of that year and they moved to Bath. Claire moved with them and she lived nearby. And the reason that they did this is because Claire wanted to keep her pregnancy a secret. So they moved to Bath where they didn't know anyone. Now, at this time, Mary had actually received 2 letters from her half sister, Fanny. You guys remember Fanny? We talked about her a little bit. We're going to talk about her again. While they were in Geneva, she got 2 letters from Fanny just expressing how unhappy her life was and how she wasn't doing well at all. And then once they got back to England in September, let's move ahead. I'm sorry if it's a convoluted timeline. Let me start over. They get back to England in September, and then a month later in October, Mary gets another letter from Fanny. Now, this was on October 9th, and it was said to be a very alarming letter. Now, I have no idea what this letter contained. I don't know if anybody does, but what we do know is that it was alarming enough that Percy actually left and went to go find her. And so did her quote unquote father, her adopted father, William Godwin. They went to go and find her. On October 10th, so the next day, Fanny was found dead at an inn in Wales with a suicide note and an empty bottle of laudanum beside her. She was only 22 years old. And besides this, we are going to address this bigger issue in a moment, but for just a minute, I want to talk about Fanny because she deserves to be talked about and remembered. And you guys might recall earlier in the episode, I mentioned how her mother wrote about her after she was born and how much she adored her daughter and how just thoroughly engaged in motherhood she was. And I think that that is such a beautiful thing. And I am very grateful that Fanny had that writing and that knowledge throughout her life because she had a hard life and she needed it. Another thing about Fanny, so it was very open in the household. It was openly known, openly said that she was not as pretty as Mary. And this is because Fanny had had smallpox and was pretty scarred from it. So she went about her life just knowing that she wasn't as pretty as Mary, wasn't as good as Mary. I feel like they were always compared, and that can be really tough on somebody. Now, since it was a very liberal and open household, we're fairly sure she would have known that William wasn't her biological father. Some people think that maybe she didn't know and maybe this contributed to her suicide, but it really doesn't make sense for everything we know about their family for her not to know. So we're pretty sure that she knew he wasn't her biological father, but he was her father in every other way. Another thing about Fanny is she excelled in drawing and music, and she helped run their household all the time. She spent much of her time fundraising and finding patronage for her father. She was huge advocate for him. She loved his work and supported him wholeheartedly and believed that he had the talent and genius that he should be supported by wealthy benefactors. And so she spent a lot of her time doing that for him and kind of raising awareness for him. Now, another interesting thing about Fanny is that originally she was in love with Percy. Now, if you'll remember, Mary did not meet Percy until, between her Scotland stays, and then they didn't get, reacquainted until she was home again. So this whole time, Percy and Fanny were intermingling. That is not the right word. Interacting. Thank you. That's the word I was looking for. So this whole time, Fanny and Percy are interacting, they're getting to know each other, and it's said that originally they had a little bit of a love affair. Now I don't know how far this went. It probably wasn't more than just a little infatuation or attachment perhaps, but then Mary came home and she and Percy fell in love. Now, as we know, Percy and Mary's quote unquote marriage um, was really not something that her father was happy about. So it kind of created this rift between the two halves of the family. And Fanny found herself in the middle of this rift because she loved her father and was so loyal and supportive of him, but she also loved her sister and Percy and wanted to be with them. And it said that she had this longing to be rescued from this just limbo, this just suspension between these two households. And I can imagine that being in a situation like that would be really, really hard. So, we're going to go into some of the theories for her suicide really quickly because we don't know what the suicide note contained. A lot of people think it was because she had a cruel stepmother. Now, we know that Mary and her stepmother did not get along well at all, but a lot of records indicate that Fanny and her stepmother got along a lot better. So, I'm not sure how you know. There's some talk about a school teaching position that she may or may not have gotten. Maybe that contributed. Some people say she was just depressed because she lived in a bad household. Some people say she was still madly in love with Percy and that contributed to it. Honestly, I don't appreciate boiling down something like suicide into theories and a single thing as to why. So, what I think we need to know about Fanny is how amazing she was, how loving, how loyal, how supportive. And I think that if we just take a glance at her life, we can probably see that she was in pain. And maybe that's all in fact, not maybe, that is all we need to know. I'm not going to linger on that. We're going to continue. So, when her body was discovered, William and Percy came and okay, pause. This is the only thing about Percy Shelley that I find remotely redeeming, and that's because I just really don't like him. But this is the only thing he does that even like remotely resembles something decent to me. But That's just me. So William and Percy came, but Percy stayed to help take care of her body and arrange things. William left. He didn't do anything, which I find very horrible. But Percy arranged for Fanny to be declared dead, because otherwise she would have been declared a suicide. And if she had been declared a suicide, then her body could have been subject to a lot of indignities. It could have possibly been dissected for educational purposes, things like that. And they didn't want that to happen to her. So if she was declared dead, then she would be able to get a funeral, and they knew she deserved that. And she didn't want her body, given to science. Some people do, and that's lovely, but Fanny didn't. And so Percy arranged for her to have a burial. But one thing that they did is actually they officially left her body unclaimed, and they did this in order to keep her anonymous. Now, William claimed that this is what Fanny would have wanted, to stay anonymous. I have a little bit of a problem with it. It kind of feels like maybe he was sweeping things under the rug, but again, I'm not them and I don't know. And losing a family member to suicide is an absolutely horrible, horrible thing. And so I at the end of the day, we can't really judge because, again, we don't know and we weren't there. And to be honest, even though there's a lot we know about their household, we don't really know the intimate details of their relationships. So I don't think it's for us to sit here and judge exactly, except for I'm going to judge. Great, Jordan. That's just beautiful. I'm just, it bothers me a little bit that William didn't stay to help take care of things. But again, what are you going to do? I don't know. That's neither here nor there, really. I mean, this is just what happened. So Percy actually wrote a poem for Fanny, and it's allegedly about their very last meeting. This poem is entitled On Fanny Godwin, and it reads, pardon me, her voice did quiver as we parted, yet I knew not that heart was broken from which it came, and I departed, heeding not the words then spoken. Misery, oh misery, this world is all too wide for thee. And if that is not heartbreaking, then I don't think anything is. Just wow. So Fanny passes away in October. 2 months later, on December 10th, Percy's wife Harriet was discovered drowned in the Serpentine, which is a lake in Hyde Park near London. And let's talk about Harriet really quickly. So, Harriet came from a really great family. They were fairly well off. She went to a girls' school and met Percy's sister, and that's how she and Percy met and fell in love. She was 16 and he was 19. They eloped to Scotland in 1811. Her family was a little surprised by this. I mean, both families were okay with the union, so I'm not entirely sure why they eloped. Nevertheless, they eloped. They remarried in London in 1814 to kind of legitimize the marriage according to English law because they went to Scotland. So somehow their marriage was less legitimate, which, if you know anything about the relations between England and Scotland, that makes so much convoluted sense. But anyway, so they were remarried in London in 1814 to legitimize their marriage further and to give safety to a daughter they had had the year before. But actually, the year before, in the fall of 1813, their relationship was pretty much done at this point anyway. Percy was gone a lot. They, I mean, they had really grown apart, and as we've discussed, Percy was awful. So, anyway, we're going to move on from that. So, anyway, they decided to remarry, probably mostly for the sake of their daughter and her legitimacy. But they agreed that after they were remarried, they would live separately. However, at this time, Harriet became pregnant, and however, they still decided to separate, and they were separated when Percy met Mary. So at this time, Harriet is basically a single mother. Her husband is gone. They're basically divorced. I mean, for all intents and purposes, they're divorced. She has a young daughter, and she's pregnant. And I don't know about you, but I can imagine that that is a very, very bleak, hard way to live. And, if you look at her life in a practical sense, she was actually doing really well financially. She had money from Percy every month. She got money from her family every month just as part of her inheritance. And so, I mean, she was secure and stable in a lot of ways, but that doesn't necessarily make you happy. And there is this theory that after she had her and Percy's son, that she took a lover who was a military officer. That I wasn't able to corroborate that. It's a theory. I don't know if anybody knows for sure, but she may or may not have taken a lover, which, like, I don't know. Good for you, Harriet. And in the summer of 1816, she actually moved in the late summer. Now, this move is what kind of leads people to believe that she had taken a lover and that maybe she was pregnant, because there really wasn't any reason for her to move. So people are thinking, I mean, scholars debate maybe she moved in order to save her family from a scandalous pregnancy. We don't really know. She never mentioned being pregnant. She never told anybody that she was. So, again, we don't know if she was pregnant. We don't know if she had a lover, but she did move in the late summer of 1816. And then in December, she wrote letters to her sister, her father, and to Percy. And then she drowned herself in Hyde Park. And she was only 21 years old. So both of these suicides were very hushed by all of the families involved. Excuses were made. Things were kind of put under the rug, and this is incredibly sad. It's sad that they did that, but it's also sad that society was. What do I? That society was in a position where they had to do so, and the shame and stigma associated with suicide is just overwhelming and insane, really. And if you've experienced suicide in any way, whether you've lost someone to suicide, whether you've been in a really dark place and thought that, been in that place yourself, it's not it's not easily explainable. Let's just say it that way. And I'm going to be adding a whole bunch of um, resources in the show notes. And I just want to take this minute to say that if you are struggling with suicide in any way, you're not alone and you don't have to be alone. And I know that it sounds so trite to say that. And I know we hear that a lot. And if you're in the depths of despair or you're in a place where you're thinking about suicide and then someone says, well, you're not alone, that can feel, it can feel a lot of ways. But you really aren't alone. And there are so many things in this world that are good to live for. And there's a reason that you're here. You wouldn't be here if you didn't need to be. And I truly believe that. And so, again, I'm going to link a whole bunch of resources in the show notes. And we're going to move on from this section because it's pretty heavy. But thank you for listening. And yes, we'll end this section there. Again, those were the deaths of Mary Shelley's half-sister Fanny and Percy's wife Harriet. They passed away in 1816 from suicide, and we are going to remember the good things about them, that they were both very beautiful young women and had a lot of life ahead of them, and I think that they deserve to be remembered because we all do. So, Harriet has passed away, which leaves their two children, Percy and Harriet's two children, without a mother. They have a daughter and a son, and Percy wanted custody of these children, and they had a lawyer tell Percy, he said, hey, if you would like the custody of your children, it would be a lot better for you legally, court wise. It would make you look a lot better if you were married to the woman that you're currently basically married to. So on December 30th of that year, Percy Shelley and Mary Shelley were officially married. Again, because they had not been married to this point, but they were officially married to kind of help them look better in the eyes of the law, so that Percy could hopefully get custody of his two children that he had with Harriet. This actually didn't happen. He did not end up getting custody of his children, and these children were given to a clergyman and his family. Now, I tried to look into this, and I don't really have a lot of information about it. It makes me sad in a lot of ways. I don't necessarily think Percy should have gotten custody of these children because he seems to not super care about their mother. And again, I'm just not a Percy Shelley fan. But it's sad to me that these children didn't go to Harriet's family or even to some of Percy's family. I find that pretty sad. I'm not exactly sure why they didn't, but I hope and I think I'm fairly sure that the family they went to was very good and that they were okay, which we can always hope for. So, Percy and Mary are now actually married, but they did not get custody of Percy's children. So, January 13th, 1817 comes around. Claire, Mary's stepsister, has her baby girl, who is the daughter of Lord George Byron, and Claire named her Alba. Later, she was renamed Allegra. And we need to talk about her for just a brief second because we're just going to grind Byron into the ground like he deserves. So later, Claire gave up custody of their daughter Alba, gave her to Byron, and a lot of people think that this is. There's a lot of controversy, okay, surrounding this, but Claire gives their daughter to Byron, and I think it was just because her life was unstable. She was financially unstable. Byron was clearly very unstable, but one thing he did have was money and a lot of it. So I think she said, hey, he can give her a better life than I can. She gave their daughter to Byron. He renamed her Allegra. And then he gave her to foster families, eventually put her in a convent, and she died at the age of 5. I'm pretty sure it was malaria. So, in case you weren't convinced that Byron is the worst man ever, please do so now. He had a lot of money, a lot of contacts, a lot of resources. He did not have to give his child to foster families and convents and have her die at the age of 5. I am appalled and heartbroken at this, and I honestly don't even know how to talk about it, so we're not going to talk about it anymore. But that's what happened to Claire and Byron's baby. So Claire is again living with Mary and Percy, and at this time they moved to a house by the Thames in London. In September of that year, 1817, Mary has a baby girl named Clara. And again, they're doing their usual thing, okay? They're writing, reading, entertaining intellectual people. This is just who they are and what they do. But at this point, they have the threat of debtor's prison again because I guess Percy doesn't have money again. Shocker. So they have the threat of debtor's prison. They don't have the best health. The house that they moved into wasn't a super healthy home to live in. It was pretty damp and drafty, and they were afraid of losing custody of their children, so they decided to leave. So on March 12th, 1818, they moved to Italy. Claire and the baby would go with them, Claire and Alba. Claire and her daughter, Alba, would go, and Mary and Percy and their 2 children would go. And they had no intention of returning to England. So they get to Italy. At this time, Lord Byron is living in Venice. They go there so that Claire can give him their daughter Alba. And the condition was that if Claire gave him custody, she couldn't have anything to do with their daughter ever again, which is so sad. And as we know, Byron renamed her Allegra and she eventually passed away. So Claire is with Percy, Mary, and their 2 children, and they're in Italy. And they have what was known as kind of like a roving lifestyle. They move around a lot. They have a circle of friends and acquaintances who move around with them. They do their regular reading, writing, entertaining, intellectual thing. Okay. In September of 1818, they're in Venice and their little girl Clara dies. She was a year old. In the next year, June 1819, they're in Rome and their little boy William passed away of malaria. So let's talk about this. Mary was beyond devastated. She lost her 2 children in less than 1 year. They had come to Italy for their health, and instead both of her children had died. She was horribly depressed. Her only comfort was in her writing. Um, Percy actually wrote a poem for her that was really, really touching. And he, in this poem, he talks about how she's leaving him for despair and how he wants to be in despair, but he can't, because if he gives in to despair, then he can't. He knows they'll both just stay there. So he writes about how he's trying to get her back from despair and kind of reclaim her as his, which is would be the sweetest, most romantic thing ever if he wasn't still doing free love and being the worst. And listen, I can't believe that I have to say this. If you practice free love and you're into that and it works for you, that's great. You do you. I'm obviously not a fan, and I don't super support it in this situation because Mary, again, wasn't really that into it. She understood the concept, but I don't think she really wanted to live that way. And Percy did it anyway. And that's really the problem that I have with it. So he writes this poem about trying to get his wife back from despair, and it would be really beautiful if it wasn't. So, anyway, at this point, Mary is ill, she's depressed, Percy is free loving. Again, Mary makes a lot of deep friendships and emotional connections with people, but nothing ever comes of that. So, actually, when William passed away, when their little boy passed away, Mary was pregnant. So their new son, Percy Florence, was born November 12th, 1819. He was their only surviving child. So together they had four children. Their last, Percy Florence, was the only one who survived childhood. Having a baby definitely lifted her spirits. It made her very happy. She was very excited to have him, but she always missed her other children, which of course she would. Of course she would. Um, she always carried their memory with her. In the summer of 1822, they moved again, and Mary was pregnant again. But on June 16th, she miscarried. And she actually almost died of blood loss in this miscarriage. It was really, really bad. Very serious miscarriage. She was bleeding a lot, and the doctor wasn't coming, and Percy was really, really concerned, and in desperation, he put her in an ice bath to stop the bleeding, and that's actually what stopped the bleeding, and it saved her life. And even though they had this experience that it was incredibly tragic, and it could have brought them together, but it didn't. Their relationship was really not great at this point, and that's unfortunate in many, many ways. I'll just say that. So that miscarriage was in June of 1822. A month later, in July, Percy was out with his friends. They were on a boat. They went, I want to say boat ride, and that just sounds so trite to me, but they went and I think they visited some friends for a few days. And on their way back, the boat hit a storm and Percy drowned. And the men that he was with also drowned. Their bodies floated up onto the beach and they were cremated there. Mary stayed in Italy for one more year. She actually did a little bit of work with Byron and she edited some of his work, and then she returned to England. And it's really, again, heartbreaking and sad, and it makes one think, what would their life be like if they hadn't left England? Because they went to Italy and everyone died, and it's so tragic, and it just, again, we'll never know. But it's a little bit of an interesting question. So let's finish out the life of Mary Shelley. She returns to England, and again, she only has her one son, Percy, and she's still pretty young. I mean, think about this. She's lost four children and her husband, and she's back in England with her father. She has to live with her father for a while because her finances were pretty precarious. But eventually, Percy's father gave her an allowance for her son, and her son Percy eventually became the heir to the Shelley estate. But there were some conditions with this. Mary was not allowed to do a biography on her husband, Percy. He didn't want her touting Percy, which is intriguing. I'm not exactly sure why, because I did mention this earlier. Percy Shelley was this great romantic poet. He was very well known, he was successful. But again, his family didn't really approve of his lifestyle. So maybe that's why they weren't super into her doing a biography. But that's just me speculating. She spent a lot of her time editing and promoting Percy's work. She really wanted to immortalize him because, again, she really, really loved her husband. Crazy. So she spent, again, her time doing this with Percy's work, and there was some romance in her life, but she never remarried. Her son was very, very devoted to her. She spent a lot of time writing and editing to help support her father. Again, championed Percy's writing, spent a ton of time doing that, and she helped less fortunate women get back on their feet and out of horrible situations. Snaps for Mary Shelley because she's awesome. Percy married a girl named Jane Gibson St. John, who was very, very lovely. She and Mary got along well. So Mary lived and traveled with them. 1839 rolls around. Okay, and Mary starts having a lot of headaches and bouts of paralysis, and this continues for the rest of her life. And on February 1st, 1851, she passed away at the age of 53, and the doctor said it was most likely a brain tumor. So a year after she passed away, they opened her small lap desk where she'd done all of her work, and inside the desk were locks of her dead children's hair, a notebook she had shared with Percy, a copy of one of his poems, and some of his ashes. Oh, and the remains of his heart. I'm pausing dramatically. Mary Shelley kept the remains of her husband's heart. And if that is not on brand, then absolutely nothing is. It's incredibly morbid. It's a little bit disgusting, but I'm applauding it because she did nothing if not stick to her aesthetic. Thank you very much. Again, that's a super, super huge summarization of the end of her life. But let's talk a little bit about, let's wrap this up. So in her time, Mary Shelley was taken seriously as a writer. But a lot of the reviewers, critics, everybody, they really missed a lot of her political work and the fact that she had a lot of her own political ideas and philosophies. That was really lost. And because of let me try to okay. Let's talk about this, okay? We need to break it down a little bit. So again, she was respected as a writer in her time. But I did mention how she spent a ton of her time editing and promoting Percy's work. And I think that this is really what made it so that for for most of time after she passed away, she was really only known as Percy Shelley's wife and the author of Frankenstein. So she hasn't been super respected for herself and her achievements the way that she deserves until fairly recently, actually. The first full length biography of her that really talks about her and promotes her was not until 1989. Can you believe that? It's insane. Like, that was so recent to have. I mean, I just can't believe that we didn't know about her and how many great things she did until so recently. It's totally crazy. And I was looking into why this could have been. And a lot of people think that it might have actually been because of her son Percy and his wife. Maybe they had quote unquote edited her life a little bit to make it more flush with Victorian values. So maybe that had kind of downplayed her a little bit and made her less appealing. I don't know. Maybe their efforts to make her fit in made it so that she didn't stand out the way that she deserved. I'm not sure. And I'm not blaming them. It makes sense. It's Victorian England. It's interesting that she was well known in her time and respected for her work, but yet modernly, it's not been until fairly recently that we understand that. But Mary always thought of herself as an author. And after Percy died, she knew that she could support herself and her child with her work. She wasn't worried about that. She said that in the days after Percy died, she said, "Well, I'll live by my pen." I know I can do that. I can support myself and my baby, which you go, girl. Get it. You get that money because you're incredible. I just find that so inspiring. I mean, it was the early 1800s and she had just lost her husband and she said and she had a child and she was alone in Italy and far from home and family and she said, "I'm not worried because I know I can take care of myself and my baby." And if that isn't inspiring, then nothing is, okay? Mary Shelley was an incredibly prominent romantic figure. Her work is phenomenal. I mean, Frankenstein, who doesn't know about Frankenstein? It's huge. It's incredible. It's one of the earliest works of science fiction. It's amazing. And even more than that, she wrote historical works. She wrote political works. She did so many great things and lived a life that was controversial in ways but so wonderful in other ways. And I think you can safely say that loved she just loved and she loved her family. She was loyal to them. She was devoted to them. Obviously, loyal and devoted to her husband, whom she loved very much. And her creativity and professional opinions and voice are just amazing. And it's a lot. I mean, it's a lot. Her life was a lot and there's a lot we could spend time discussing, but overall I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to have learned more about Mary Shelley and to be able to appreciate her for the things that she did and the person that she was. And I hope that all of you can feel the same way. So, next time you think of Mary Shelley or Frankenstein, just remember that there's a lot more to it. And thank you so much. I'm so glad that we got to do this together. I will see you next time on Not Strictly History.